Welcome back, everyone. So while people are still dripping in, I'll try to introduce Johan. So Johan works for AC-Geeks. That's a company name that has very bad marketing, but you all know it because it's a company from Thomas Kreinen, who basically started IFC OpenShell and maintains it. So Johan is one of the employees of AC-Geeks and leading the work on the buildingSMART validation service. So again, a little bit of history. This used to be the BSD validation service where we would check files for information consistency against the standards of the BSD. We still do that, but we hope to kind of elevate it a little bit as well to become the future of software certification at some point. So today, Johan is presenting the current status of this service, which is still very much focused on schema checking and information consistency. And we invite you to try it yourself as well. The links are in the email that Dan sent this morning. So this is basically I'll be very open to you. This is us having free testers instead of having to pay for testing. So you're the free testing panel that we don't have to pay for. So it will be an introduction, and for the rest, interactive you at work. I actually do hope that things will break because we would learn from that. Johan probably hopes it would not, but I hope it will break. I'm also quite sure it will break, but all right, Johan.
Okay, thank you for I will start with some introduction about the tool, the architecture, how it works, and the tech stack that we're using. So the function is to have a neutral, transparency checking of IFC files to be able to validate the IFC syntax, so using the grammar, IFC grammar, and also the BSD configuration. Now you're all experts about BSD, so you can check that with this tool. And later, and it's a work in progress, we'll have some checks for the implemented agreements and information proposition. Back to that later during the presentation. Here is just so for this tool we use different technologies. We use Docker containers that are put together with Docker controls. We have a Flash server. We use Redis to choose a tag. And for checking the grammar, we use Large, so Python, Net. For the implementer agreements and informal propositions, we use jerking Concomber, so that is to translate natural language rules into computer interpretable. And of course, we use IFC OpenShell and ifc-pipeline. So for you workflow, so you have a user interface where you can upload your IFC files. Get them. Several checks will be put with several checks, so syntax, schema, BSD, and that. Agreements and you can see directly in the dashboard the results of. You can also view the report, and there is an interactive part where you can add amount of time required to create the model, and also set the license to by default. And you can also add additional details. So those are the checks available. So as syntax, we were saying, with large, IFC grammar, and you record the error message, and in the report you can see the error. That's in a moment. The IFC schema, so you check the rules in the observability of attributes, for example, and the BSD get the classification from BSD after being able to read this classification in the IFC file, and you validate the consistency. And finally, I will show, I didn't implement just checks, either the second one, I integrated it. But you have to know that the last two checks are quite new for them. Okay, so now I will so how many of you have opened the link in your email? The email of that in the Zoom chat as well.
I don't know. I think it's a single sign-on, right? If you already have a BSD account or
Exactly.
something like that.
Your buildingSMART account.
Yeah, we didn't mention that too much, but we're using indeed one buildingSMART services account. So if you ever logged into BSD or UCM or validation service, that's all the same account, same passwords. If you don't have one, you can just simply create one as well. There's a sign up now link at the bottom.
I received an email when a new file is updated and license of a change. So, control essentially uploaded the file. Okay, so this is the interface. Just click you can remove your dashboard, your personal dashboard, and you can see all the files that the here. Okay, let's license. So it's more. Then I can view more detailed report of use checks by name, the license, by number of geometries, number of properties. So this is a small test file. Here we can see that the syntax is valid, so right IC file, but there is issue with value of the with edition date for this IC classification. We can for this file, there is a problem with the syntax because string in step should have here the tool found the classification reference, so domain, but there was no requirement for it. Requirement equals value.
Can you expand a little bit on this one? So you have found in the IFC file classification. You mean properly done? Because it's a properly done classification, pointing to the STD.
Exactly. The URI is valid.
Okay, but
I can't find. There is no classification properties, no constraints.
Okay. So there is something classified as tomato, but
when we go to the BSDB for the classification, there is no classification.
Okay.
For example, work for the BSDB.
What that means is the MVD columns are checking.
That means that executing in the program, mainly because it's a bit hard to agree on what to report on output of this.
Also, the license, if you change to some other license, that's actually changing the file content or just some kind of a marker?
No, it's just some data in the database.
Yeah, just to give you a bit of insight in my hidden agenda here. So the idea is that the idea is to be able to publish IFC files as well. So we just, as buildingSMART, we don't have too much example files with IFC.
Yeah.
So when someone uploads an IFC file with an open license, we can share that in the community as well. Okay. So that's the idea behind the license. So most of them are private, we can't share them, but if someone uploads a file of which they say, so we know that we are able to share them in the community. So that's just for us kind of a way to get more public IFC data out there. The production hours is, if people fill that in, I hope to get kind of an impression on productivity on objects. So if we know how many objects are in there, how many classes, what the detailedness of the geometry is, how many properties, and we know the production hours, maybe we can find some kind of a correlation between those things where we can say, where we can start to value IFC files. So when a new IFC file comes in, we might be able to predict, okay, this might be the number of production hours if you had to make that, so this is the value of this data. So that's very experimental, and this would probably also not end up in the first version when we push this to production, but it is something that we kind of take into account already for future developments.
Another example, for example, I created an error for the syntax, so I just added some characters there, and the program is able to tell me the syntax checking program log directly. So you can have fun and try to modify your IFC file. To try.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to report any incoherence. Yeah.
Do you envision integrating a viewer at any point?
No, absolutely not. We will not do that. Who was asking that? Yeah, no,
Open source?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Everything we do on this is open source, but viewing or kind of any kind of visualization is absolutely not at the roadmap.
I've wanted a file
Okay.
at the unencoded David dots. I just got like a red exclamation mark.
It's supposed to be an error, but it's frozen error.
Yeah, but it doesn't give me, it doesn't tell me what is wrong with
We'll come back to you.
it. Yeah. Maybe there is a
From the back of the room, I'm only seeing red errors everywhere.
Okay.
Real big files that we may have problems on, written in my candidate.
That means the tool is working, right?
Yeah,
Okay, well, yeah, Unicode is called out. Okay,
It's going back to my side.
eating right. Somewhat understand.
So that, I asked the question because if I have more than one element, how do I know which one it is, but besides looking at it? That's why I asked your question. But this is really not meant for more than test cases.
No, the idea here is, again, there's a difference between is my data valid and correct to be used further up in a workflow, in a tool chain?
Yep.
Or is my data correct according to my design requirements?
Right, no, okay.
So the idea, to answer your question, if it's not valid, if there are errors, at the moment it shows a list, but the intent really is to get a VCF file out of this as well. And then you can open the VCF file with the ifc file where you can really look at things to be able to fix them and check and see the flow.
I don't disagree with the sentiment, but it does introduce like 5 extra steps.
Well, not if other people also do this. I think that, yeah, again, from a buildingSMART perspective, there's a lot of validation tools out there, and we don't want to compete with them. But there are cases where the tools disagree if the file is valid or not, and that's why we're doing this.
Leaving files is a little important. Because I should get this sample.
Does the validation service have any like that API, or right now it's just a pure GUI menu interface?
For now, only pure.
Yeah, I wonder, and the validation process must be run in the cloud base. Plus, into
Everything run on a server, which is in the Flask server. So all the checking programs are there.
Okay.
Yeah, so the idea also for us is to get information. So like I said, at some point we hope to gather metrics from when a lot of people upload files. You can see kind of metrics on which files from which software vendor make the returning errors, and we can use that for software certification. So it's in our interest that people upload their files. We also do understand the main starting point and the base principle of this is to be a judge in these discussions between vendors. Is the file correct, or is the software tool correct, or what's happening? And there's a lot of cases, indeed, mainly in the US because of legal issues, but also in other countries where clients are not allowed to upload their files, but they still want to use this tool as this judgment tool. So it is available to run on your local machine as well for those cases, so you can still have that judgment in these cases. yeah, it is also in our interest from the software certification idea that people do upload it here. Not intended as an SDK or a plugin in any other tool. That's really up to the software vendors and the commercial models to compete on.
Yeah, I'll ask you to elaborate a little bit on the headings. So I understand what MVD is, I understand what B is, what's IP, what's IP.
Okay, I start with this one. So the checking program for this check is a text parser with the IFC rules, the IFC grammar. So if there is an error during parsing, it's an error. It's not. The schema is listing attributes, optionality of it also checks the relationships, I think, and data types. MVD, we know that we have a program that's able to parse MVD files and Python script to see the rules inside. The SVD, I have some slides for those ones.
Oh, okay. Implement the agreements and this.
Yeah, I will.
This
So I go directly to that.
coming.
We want to see the VSD. I will check VSD. We retrieve the IFC references, solution attributes. We get I, and we call the I. From this, we get the specification, then information, and produce. We go from the location with I to then the classification object in the classification project where we can have where the components on the properties of the and that has a classification. We say those are the constraints impose what we are checking for now, so the predefined value and to retrieve the property. Here's an example of two elements within this. There are some special cases, so sometimes there is no classification in the file, so it's correct. No URI or invalid URI, for now it's considered correct. So the same for two. So classification properties, no constraints, correct, and the current developments of the tool, so we're thinking a lot about the design of the report, how explicit it should be, how to present the results of the validation, so especially for the classification, do it by classification first or by instance, and keeping a hierarchical structure. And the second thing is this jacking that are human readable description of rules. And thanks to this technology, we can use placeholders in the sentences, in the natural language sentences, transform that into complex interpretable rules, so that we can reuse Python code to orchestrate shared sets of rules for business. I will show you an example. This is an implementer agreement. So, although it is structured, you can see that it's natural language. So giving some, then we can transform that into a Python function, but the checks and the ifc file. I sent the links of what exactly are arguments and informal proposals. Here, for example, in an ifc closed shell, every edge shall be referenced exactly. Find here.
Correct. I was just gonna say, we should avoid the problem we run into with certification is not passing shouldn't be passed. So we should head that off before it becomes a problem. So like the BSTD example should be just not checked. Checking and passing is different from not checking.
Yes, in principle, yes. That's two different things.
Yeah, but it currently is passed.
Oh, yeah, in terms of representing the results, right? Reporting the results. Yeah. Not checked, yeah. Yeah.
Versus, you could even get the URI wrong, so you made an incorrect URI, but you still passed it. It would actually be failed because the URI was, or it wouldn't even be checked because you had an invalid URI.
I think we have this wrong URI or URI that is not found in the STD. Like that would be one of the test cases.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it seems like the infrastructure's there. It's just from a semantics, like not checked or actually not passed is more. I think its goal is what LAN states to make these distinctions between vendors and stuff like that. It should just be more explicit in the reporting.
Absolutely. But again, the case where we got the red thing. Red is associated as failed, but in the case of the tomato, it was red because there were no properties in the STD. Is that a mistake?
It was red, so
tomato example.
it was green.
Yeah, so that,
Okay, that's fine.
yeah, that's what I was reacting to. Like,
Okay.
Because it's just logging whatever, it's not saying, okay, got it.
Maybe there's a discrepancy because tomato is green in the dashboard. There is because it's in the report, so.
Just supporting what Greg said, for me, if you have an invalid URI, it cannot be passed. That's not correct. Validated.
I don't know what the distinction is. Like, there's passed, failed, and invalid, right? Or unparsable or whatever. or unevaluatable.
Yeah, think about the case where the URI is pointing to the data dictionary that is not the S data. So in that case, it's, yeah, I found the URI in the right position, in the right structure of the IC file, but I cannot say anything else because it's not querying the data dictionary to make sense.
I have no more remarks.
You showed this role, natural language, English language. Can you also elaborate a little bit how this is translated to machine understandable language?
And implement that part. Okay. In those parts,
Setting up this kind of test cases means that you have to understand how to translate it into this Python.
When I think the 80-20 is IDS is the simple way to do that. This is really hard. That's why geometry checks and stuff. Probably, I mean, or not, but that makes sense. Is this, I'm assuming that's calling the ifc OpenShell library to actually do some of the evaluation.
Yeah. How does this deal with? I noticed that one of the things you check is geometry checks about the shared edge, for example. That you touch. These tolerances there.
we'll come back to you. I will ask it. Will implement it.
Another question. Presume that's R21 files, which you can. Are you also testing it R28 files?
Andreas, just to link to the presentation, when we mentioned the formal rules, and we mentioned the fact that some of these formal rules can be captured in IDS, and some of them need further semantics. This is probably what we were thinking about, is Gherkin syntax to capture further semantics and use these and write these formal rules to sacrifice against, like, every ifc alignment should have at least and most one horizontal, vertical, count, and so on. Again, this real contribution will be in this direction and reaching those working grammars and the Python implementation to do that. I think the reason why Rail choose to do that is that they're doing this for their project, and automatically they have something in the validation service that is ready to be used right after the project.
Uploaded a file, and then you made error when it's try to do the report, it actually shows that it clear.
files you're allowed to share?
Our Coco architecture sample that we use, is it something that we can share? The Loma Linda, whatever model that we use. I exported from Revit to IFC.
Oh, okay.
Component, that's one component.
Yeah, but my problem is, I just want to see the report. I'm not able to get it.
Okay.
What does dashboard mean?
It's like showing like, and then eventually like it was like a bad gateway.
The dashboard, what do you have?
Yeah, I have it both in the schema and also IP. And how do you use the like checkbox for the MVD, or like what it is supposed to?
No, it's not checked.
Okay.
Yeah.
Angel, your question, your tolerance thing, are those agreed? Of course, yeah.
I have a lot of issues on my mind, which is around tolerancing and tolerance values, small values. I don't have any real agreement.
But it's probably the,
One of the biggest things for us, for sure.
yeah.
There's nothing you fix about it.
Well, this is an interesting thing. I have no idea how to even look at implementer agreements, like where they are, where they live, so I'm happy I can find them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a question about that. So what's the feeling about having implementers agreement captured in this way rather than, having the standard and then multiple MVDs repeating, extending, or deprecating some behaviors?
When I found out you could add stuff through a subset of the model, my mind blew up. So, right, because people do this, which is not what you're supposed to be able to do. So to me, this is much more interesting. It would be handy, because there's still a implementer agreement that I witnessed happen. That was, we're now gonna have no more standard case walls. Still have them.
Yeah.
So I have no idea where these things are, so.
Having a library of computer interpretable agreements is more convenient than frictions.
Can read an MD.
I think it even goes further. It's not just having a library of computer interpretable implements agreements, also bringing those implementers agreements under the eyes of end users. At the moment, end users don't see the agreements. This tool, end users see, okay, my file might be valid according to the schema, but according to the implements agreement, which I think.
I'm an end user, and I'm technical enough to know this. I've never known where to look.
Yeah.
Programmer, and I always have to try to figure out where to look. But I mean, a number of years back, 5, 10 now, I was part of a group that went through every single implement in relation for IFC 203. I made a recommendation about what should happen to them. Some of them were obsolete. Most of them, in fact, in my mind, all of them, we shouldn't have implementation agreements. Update MVD often to version 1.4 that includes implementer agreements exactly the same. But 10 people happened to be in a room in Berlin in 2007.
This wasn't mine in standard cases in Prague.
Right.
Yeah.
And you happened to be there.
Yes.
Right.
And why do we still have standard case? I've been wanting this for 6 years.
Yeah. Right, right. Yeah, we don't need to get into detail of that, but generically, I think it would be amazing that, like software, our company, right? We have updates. They come out a cadence. Here, we have a new major version every, less often we have, or more often we have minor versions. So that, you know, IC 4.3.1 gets rid of center case, or whatever. As opposed to, here's a page that happens to be on a website that if you happen to know, or you has happened to be in the room at the time. Yes, this is absolutely acceptable, but I agree.
There are cases, for example, the famous reserve PSET prefix, you know?
Yeah.
It's the famous implementary agreement. So one thing is capturing the sentence, the documentation. So in the 1,000 pages of the HTML documentation, you capture this sentence and you say, my job is done, because every developer should know this by heart.
Right.
And now we have the chance to say, okay, this is there, so if someone wants to read that, fine. But then we have an automatic way of checking that.
Right.
So I think it's both. Very convenient in my point of view.
And philosophically, this is why I think we should more common tools. Because again, yes. How are you going to know on page 783 that PSET underscore is reserved? And you probably won't, and you will probably never find out until a user has a property set that they call PSET underscore user, and that somehow shows up somewhere that someone complains about. Maybe.
I've done this, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting PSETs.
Surprised you haven't been arrested already. Right, yeah,
Well, I hand code things every once in a while, because I have to test stuff, and thought I didn't know this either.
Yeah, your piece that falls in the forest and no one's around.
So you just need a capital S to get the reserve, right? The reserve one is a PSET with a small s.
Right, yeah, exactly. Reserved by whom?
Yeah, exactly.
Where, right? It's not even consistent.
Case sensitive, case insensitive, yeah.
One piece of feedback on the validation tool, just, I don't know what you want to do. I did try uploading same named ifc file that had different content. They're both lovingly sitting there. I have no idea if that's something where you want to say, oh, is this a file?
It's written in the documentation that you shouldn't do that.
Right. Well, that's why I tested it.
No, I'm joking. It's good feedback.
But I understand the response. I had the question about the viewer. I'm wondering, maybe this just goes to helping people find the data in the report. So like, an IC error, not a model error. IC only exists after it's exported from a tool. So PDF is actually not helpful in that case. So the question was basically like, you have 1,000 walls in this file, it's this one. That was the context in which I was thinking about it. But then there's other less graphical things like an encoding error versus a data error, I suppose. That would never show up in the end user tool anyway.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, it's a sensitive topic because of all of the different stakeholders and interests. On the other hand, it's also from a usability perspective, it's difficult. I've been sitting here next to someone who has an IFC file which is perfectly fine according to the schema. But there's a couple of these informal propositions. I was speaking on how that are wrong. And the result of that is that it doesn't visualize. So yeah, we can have a viewer, but then these three roofs wouldn't visualize in the viewer because they're not modeled according to how it should be. So the only way to get the error is in the reports because it doesn't visualize anyway. So it's a little bit the added value of a viewer in what we're trying to do is not always there.
Well, so this is the distinction of the viewer is the validator, or the viewer is also, Pozi's in the room, so Slibri, sure, you take anything and you'll show anything because you've had to, right? So to me, that's what a viewer should do in this case. It shouldn't be validation, it'd just be, I'll take any junk and I'll throw it on the screen, just to help you show things that show up in the report. To your point, nothing to do with validation by showing it on the screen. But there's a distinction there, but
Yeah, but I mean, if, in your previous example, when you have 100 walls and one of it is wrong and you want to point to it, maybe you're pointing to an empty space because it doesn't visualize because it is wrong.
I mean, you could, there may be something, like, it has a low coordinate, right? You could put a point that says, hey, this would be a wall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but that kind of, opens up a box of Pandora that we're just not ready for at the moment. There's still a lot of other things on the to-do list first.
Well, of course, if you go to the tree structure, you can't see the wall, but you can point at the tree structure. Like, this is where the wall contains the file.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do somewhat disagree, by the way. I mentioned this to Pascal also, like, the fact that a viewer shows anything isn't always good. Good for that application. It does enable that content too, of which I am sure we've created some. And maybe by volume, I don't know. But
if you were in Paris, John, you were there, that was the #1 request, a viewer that helps with validation.
Right.
Like we did this session at the end of the call, end of the technical thing, and that's the first thing that was asked.
I don't think they heard you.
Well, right. ISD is lacking in source of truth.
Right.
Right.
I didn't want everyone to use it.
You guys are bad. Too bad I have a very good memory of non-consequential things.
Well, I think that's one of the most consequential things.
Right. But yes, I mean, sitting in that little bowl, we went through what are the biggest things we could work on, and everybody says a viewer that validation.
I think there's also, to move a little bit away from the topic of viewer, it's a bigger topic on how we present and visualize the reports. So 3D viewer is only one thing, the report is one thing, BCF is one thing, but we're also thinking about maybe grouping topics, I'm not sure if you still remember this original report from Jeffrey Wicks about functional parts, which was a combination of concept templates and entities and properties. So having functional parts, basically splitting up these implementation layers again in functional parts, where we can use that we can use as a first entrance for kind of a quick overview instead of these long reports, is also one of the things that is being discussed. So representing the results in a usable way is a bigger topic that doesn't only touch the 3D.
I think that the geometry validation information used is reported some geometry features. However, there's thousands of them. How can it address that in my file to find out exactly where is problem? It complains that a closed shell, there are age reference by the two items. Yeah. Definitely, a viewer will be helpful. First thing is good. It does pick up some geometry issues. One more.
Yeah, that's always the case, right?
You can never finish, but definitely the first thing is good. It's already start to report some geometry.
I think that's probably recurring topic is that these are two separate workflows. One is finding errors, and the other workflow is fixing. Of course, one should have the other, to facilitate the other, but these are two. I think we also had a couple of examples when really it's clear that these two
identifies effects, and effects can derive from the same codes. One code there are 3 errors that are coming from the same code. In this case, this tool is highlighting the effects and not the code, or they give you a hint what the codes can be, and you click on and you solve it 100. So there's also this layer approach to the errors.
Well, so one thing I would suggest is I get a file. Let's say this file doesn't fit into your application. Pass it through the validation in a private way, of course, because it's a so delete button, yes, please. And I see, oh yes, there's a bunch of problems with that file. But I have no way, like, depending on where the source is, it might be someone I've never heard of. I don't actually have a way to communicate with the creator of that file. Well, meaning that the vendor who created that file. Say, hey, you might want to look at this because it's causing problems. So is there something where we could have a directory that says your email addresses that you could have associated with these applications? Problems.
It's really up to the user to report it back, though, I guess.
Okay.
It's really up to the user to report it back. But even then, you're right, because they might be receiving that file from a different user. So.
Yeah, that's a very common thing that happens in our problem reports is, hey, I can't read this file.
Yeah.
Okay, that file is bad. You get a new file. And no, I can't. I got to read it from someone and they give me what they give me.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that ends the block.
Yeah.
But I could short circuit it and go to the application that's running it and say, hey, I got this file from one of your users or from someone who's using and then pass it on. This is causing a problem in the file. They might say, well, you got to fix it, or they might say, oh, that's a bug. Go ahead and next word. But there are many, many applications that provide IC that I have no idea who they are.
So I think we should turn the question around. Do you want to be receiving these reports on your email address if we
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, well then we'll add yours. And I think it's for every vendor the same.
I mean, look, honestly, most people do have my email address, so I get a lot of people directly contacting me. But even if it were again, IFC at Autodesk,
Yeah.
right?
No.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So as I said, this is a kind of a first attempt that needs to grow into something that's called software certification. But in that sense, it's not a punishment tool that says, hey, this software tool always makes the same problem. It always, the idea is that you could also inform the software vendors, hey, we're constantly seeing this same issue here, you need to have a look at it. And of course, we do that only for buildingSMART members, and the other ones not.
No. What you just said is here's a digest of the problems you've seen with your file.
Exactly.
Here's here's by version number. Okay,
Yes.
I might be less interested in 2013 problems than 2023 problems, right? But
And if people set that the license of their file is somewhat public, we can even share that file with the vendor as well for testing.
right.
So those are, long-term ideas, absolutely.
Yeah, you know what? Interesting. Like maybe I don't know if it's a license exactly, but there might be I don't want you to share this publicly, but I will allow you to share this with the vendor
Yeah.
for testing purposes only, right?
Yeah.
So for internal use. That might be a toggle that would be, no, not public, but internal testing, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make a joke again about reading terms and stuff, but everything you upload, we're allowed to use for testing. But yeah, then we can't share it with the software vendors yet, so good idea to add that.
Yeah, but it's at least the metrics that we collect in these databases, like the fact that consistently a certain version of a certain software fails in that area, it's a food for forum. So we have a forum, we can bring the two parties together and say, listen, this tool is constantly failing this piece of geometry. Why don't we have a discussion about that?
So at least this is providing some hints, some insightful things what the stuff.
Yeah, be careful with that, we can use, again, there are a lot of common reports we get is like, this isn't working, and like, no, we can't give you your file. So then, I can't help you, right? Like, this is not generically failing, right? And this is failing for you for some reason. So I don't have some sort of data from you. And often I say, well, give me some small stuff that, right, that shows the problem. Sometimes I think it's that. But many people might not use the validation tool if they know that you now have access to their prison project.
But yeah, I mean, just from every project has an NDA. The IT regs in the world basically allow a specific kind of access, troubleshoot issues, but that wouldn't be allowed by indefinite ownership, or not ownership, but indefinite access by third-party organization. So like being able to delete the file after you're done is important.
Or auto-delete.
Or an auto-delete, yeah.
Right, and like, again, it makes sense to say, we're going to collect errors, but anonymized errors. Like, your application is always failing on error fixing phase. We can't tell you, you can't give any of the data, and we're not storing any of the data because that's private user data. But we can at least tell you that this is something that you. That's still helpful, and you still get people uploading files. But again, yeah, I'd be concerned about getting pushback from the community if they thought you could just hold on to this forever for any purpose.
I guess it should be offline, basically. Validator locally.
Right.
Yeah.
And then an error report that's generated. That could be sanitized, sanitized at that point. And the user can verify it is in fact sanitized.
That's still monetizable, right? Because you could say, hey, you can download this and it costs you. That's money.
Who needs
I don't care about that.
Who needs that?
It really depends on about to regenerate their model, only reproduce the problem, and then they go back to the vendor. And they say, okay, this file can be shared with the vendor. And on the customer, how serious they see this problem for them to be shared. It's a collaboration.
So, this is actually a really interesting discussion. I suggest we continue with at lunch. But if there's any other burning questions for the validation system itself and how it operates and where you can find information on it. Anyone?
I have one very quick question, and I'm sorry if I missed it. So the MVD column, is that not implemented?
Not yet, the program is there, but we're thinking about how to bring it on. Check.
And I
Possible to rerun when you have.
Going into the row of a file and doing the check.
Yeah.
Do we need instead of uploading it,
Yeah.
you want like have a button to say check again the same file?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
in case the checking program changed.
Yeah.
To fix it.
We do have minus
Sure.
and count later.
All right, then just mentioning validate at buildingSMART.org. That works, right? If you want to contact if you want to contact Johan or anyone else on this topic, or maybe even directly you want to email. Perfect. Then we're heading for lunch. That's here again, I guess?
Yeah, same place
All
as
right.
yesterday.
And then back in an hour. Thank you, Johan.